Hello everyone, I'm Simon from Studio Liddell. I've worked there for 4 weeks, so don't ask me any difficult Studio Liddell questions. But my background's 15 years in the video games industry. And I've been brought in to help head up with my colleagues, who I think are at the back, hello, help head up the VR and AR and interactive team at Studio Liddell. We've actually been making VR for 9 years. Peter's been doing it, and he'll tell you about it afterwards. And we've got some demos that we're going to show afterwards. We've got some demos from the other people on the panel. So if I'll introduce the panel one by one. I'll invite them on. So we've got David Sproxton. Would you like to take a place? From Ardman, and David's also on the BAFTA VR group. We've got Nick, who can come back on the stage. I won't introduce him again. We've got Ben from Death Dragons. So Ben's worked in the games industry as well for many years, and it now has his own company called Death Dragons, where they're concentrating on VR, a bit of AR as well, a lot of VR stuff. And we have Jonathan as well, who's joining us from, he's got a background in technology in the games industry. He's joining us from a company called Focal Point VR. And I'll sit down, make them all feel a bit more comfortable. So really we're just going to have a chat about VR for half an hour, and then I think if we have some questions at the end, and also if you've got questions specifically about Nick's talk, if we could have those at the end, that would make a lot of sense. So what do we want to talk about first? We sort of pitched this panel as a technology and question about what we're going to see as the future of VR, but I think after Nick's talk as well, we also want to talk a lot about storytelling and animation, because we are at an animation conference. So Nick, do you want to start off this question of where is VR and AR going to be in 5 years, 20 years, 50 years? What's your opinion?
Sure, yeah, I mean AR currently is pretty new. Like there's no consumer kit out there, and even the stuff that's not released yet, the Microsoft HoloLens, things like that, it's quite a small field of view. I think those sort of things will improve quite quickly, and in 5 years we'll maybe be at the same stage VR is now in terms of consumer kit at least. Certainly corporate uses and more kind of high-end uses. I'm sure they're using AR right now. Certainly HoloLens is out there. But it's one of those things where with AR, I don't know, it's like I've never used it myself. I've not got around to it yet. No one's been polite enough to let me have a go. But it's kind of restricted to the space you're in. So as long as you've got an interesting space, it's great. But I guess if you're in your living room, you're kind of restricted to smaller uses, potentially. But I don't know, that's just something I haven't got around to yet. But I think in terms of where it's going, eventually we're going to get to this point where those two things collide. And you're going to have these headsets which are AR and VR, and they're not restricted by the kind of slightly ambiguous definition between the two. They're going to blend together and be these amazing things. In 5 years' time, VR is just going to be awesome, and sort of very much like realistic and awesome and great. And then 10, 20 years is just, yeah.
Even more awesome.
Even more.
The answer. Yeah. Jonathan?
I could go. I think in 5 years' time, our thinking is that VR will be approaching ubiquity. So we'll be looking at maybe 500 million active users of VR. AR and VR, you're right, will undoubtedly converge. There are some technical challenges with AR, not just around the field of view, but around the ability to effectively draw black in front of your eyes. At the point when that problem's solved, you'll be able to put an AR headset on, and it'll do the same as VR by effectively blocking out things as well as adding things to your environment. I think it's interesting, Tim Cook from Apple's been talking about AR and VR recently without actually saying what Apple's strategy is, but they're very clearly betting on AR in 5 to 10 years as being a really, really big thing, and they're a little lukewarm on VR.
Like everything Apple, they don't necessarily do it first.
No,
but they might do it better than everyone else.
I think until headsets can look stylish, then Apple aren't going to get involved. But I think, 10 years out, they're the same thing. 5 years, VR is mass market, and AR I think is more than just industrial. I think the opportunity for a Google Glass, but slightly more stylish and slightly less intrusive, to augment consumers' experience. And you look at the Pokemon Go experience, that's what makes the AR experience.
Pokemon Go is the biggest AR project, most successful AR project of all time.
It's the fastest selling free-to-play monetized app of all time.
Yeah, and it's made over 100 million.
Yeah, a lot more than that.
It's different
Close
different stats every day.
Yes.
But certainly, so Pokemon Go is augmented reality. It's laying something over the world. So VR puts you inside the world, inside a headset. AR overlays something over the world. So Pokemon Go is the perfect example. So David, just to bring you in here with your BAFTA VR hat on. Is it something that have you had many? Because it's a new group, isn't it? Have you had many
It's a Los
chats?
Angeles BAFTA gang, and there's a London connection. So it's a very, very new body. Quite a bunch of quite high-level players. So the big players, the Oculuses of the world, the Sonys of the world, those that have got a stake actually in hardware alongside software, in particular hardware sellers. So Sony, they're looking at obviously what are the commercial possibilities for it. How do you get those mass markets? There's obviously a technical aspect to what that group's looking at, in the same way that, file formats in the digital world, who's going to drive standardization. So part of it is looking at that. Part of it is looking at actually where it is going and how you get to grips with it. Because it's a bit like going back to 1896, isn't it? Start of film. Was it railways, trains coming at you? You're sitting in a tent and there's trains coming at you. What else can you do with film? 1896, nobody really knew. Now we know more about it. Again, storytelling had to develop in a slow, gentle way until we got to where we are. So it's kind of grappling with these things. It won't take another 110 years to get there because the technology and the thinking happens really, really fast. There'll be a lot of attrition. A lot of stuff will fall by the wayside, I'm sure. 20 years' time, I've got no idea. Absolutely no idea. Who knows where we are in 20 years' time? If we look back 20 years' time, it's still almost in the days of black and white TV. I think a bit like, what film when it came along? What is it we're trying to do with it? Is it documentary? Is it drama? Is it whatever? Pop videos? It's an extraordinary VR. Is an incredible toolkit, that's for sure. And and there are various ways in which you can use it. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We made 1360, a Google Spotlight film, which was very interesting, quite expensive, but Google were putting up the money. Learned a lot about how you tell effectively a comedy, a series of gags really. It's a thing called special delivery. It's a story between it's a kind of rear window setup. So you are looking at a kind of apartment block, and it's a story between the janitor and Father Christmas trying to deliver presents. But it gave us the opportunity in each of those apartments to have something going on. So as you explored the environment, it triggered an action, and if you went back to that apartment, the next little bit of that story would play. So a lot of kind of short form storytelling in that piece. The whole thing runs for about 4.5 minutes, something like that, if you play the whole thing. And then we did We Wait, which was a BBC connected studio piece, which is a much more first-person piece, literally quite sedentary. You're with refugees on the shores of the Med, waiting for a rubber boat to come and pick you up, and that's much, in a way, more meditative. And that was a completely different story and a completely different approach. And I don't know what the answer is. I think everybody's trying to think ahead of the game. I think the storytelling bit, from our point of view, we're not going to be the technical leaders of this stuff. That's not what we do. We're looking at how you would adjust storytelling. And I think theatre, immersive theatre, is probably, from our point of view, the closest that you'll get to it, in terms of how you think through getting the audience to immerse and absorb and be part of the stories you're telling in that rather narrative structure. And I've got a feeling that as animators, those constructed worlds are the ones that are going to work really well, because simply you have so much control over how you construct that world and how you construct the stories. There'll be, news guys will use it for a completely different reason, but it's a huge open field at the moment. It's very, very new as a toolkit.
So let's pick up on that point about interactivity that you made there. Nick was talking about interactivity. Ben, you've worked in the games industry for many years, and you worked on a lot of story-based games as well. So how do you feel that? So we're talking about the future. What's the future? Games going to merge more. We're going to get better stories. Where do you see that going with games and VR and interactivity?
Yeah, for me, it can be quite frustrating, because I see a lot of VR experiences coming out, and they're going, we've got to find out how to do these 3D stories. But for myself, we've been telling these stories for 15, 20 years now in games. And a lot of the games, you can just turn around and see, I can just walk away. So I think with all the talent which is in the games industry, I think there's now a lot of crossover where a lot of gaming people are now coming into the storytelling industry, and likewise, I think a lot of gaming people are now going, oh, hey, actually, I really want to do a lot more with these stories. Myself, worked on things like Silent Hill and stuff, where it was quite an immersive story and it was very scripted, but then look at other stories such as Enslaved, and you had lots of branched options in those stories. So with VR, I think it's an exciting new sort of like platform, which I think right now we're still finding our legs, like everyone said.
So Death Dragons is not describing itself as a games company,
no,
but it's a lot of game developers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're based around game developers, but we're not, say, going, hey, we're just going to make games. We are making those interactive stories because we know how to get the player or the viewer and actually bring them into the experience, which a lot of, obviously we're doing like animation if we want to tell a story like, like the Syria story or something like that. We know how to get those players involved with the
Yeah, so I mean at Studio Liddell as well, we're basically all game developers in our team, in the VR team, and it's this. We were talking about it before the panel as well, and saying that games developers have been making 3D worlds for 25 years, really since Doom and Quake sort of kicked it all off in the early 90s. So we're taking those things like the Half-Life 2 example that Nick made, and we've had interactive stories, 360-degree stories, haven't we, for 20 years? So
I think one of the you were talking about interaction and storytelling.
Yeah.
One of the challenges in the near term, so the next 2 or 3 years with VR, is the controller. There's no standard controller, and you look at the story of the games industry and the evolution of this controller, which lots of people didn't like, and to a certain extent sort of boxed the games industry into a particular direction. And then with Nintendo and the Wii, they sort of freed things with a slightly different controller. With VR, there is no standard controller, and I think until something emerges over the next couple of years, it's going to be a real challenge to develop a set of sort of games content.
My argument
that works across.
My argument is the sort of Steve Jobs argument that we've already got the standard controller.
Yes.
Yeah, but yes. So Daydream, for example, has one.
Well,
Vive has two.
Yeah, I mean.
I'm talking about Leap Motion. So I'm talking about using your hand, so we can scan. Ben's demo is going to be doing this later, I think. Sorry, I'll let you explain it.
So one of the bits of tech which I'm really excited about is you can get a bit of tech which has been out in the market for about 5 years now, called a Leap Motion. Stick it on the front of an Oculus and stick your hands in the world, and that, for me, is where we should be in 5 years. Right now, we've got these horrible bits of plastic. Yeah. They're tracking, and then they're losing tracking. They're the first iteration.
I think one of the things that I've really picked up on over my many years in the games industry is that people don't like games controllers. They don't like bits of technology. It's the whole. So my Steve Jobs example is when, famously, apparently, when Steve Jobs, when they were pitching the iPhone and the pads to him, they tried to do a stylus, and he said, "Well, you don't need a stylus. You've got a stylus. Everyone's got a stylus in their hands, so you just use your finger. We don't need a stylus." And I think the same with VR. Why do we need? Because we're doing so many different things in VR, and all the controllers so far have all been basically guns.
Yep.
So we're sort of encouraging people to make gun games because the controllers are like this. Why do we need to do that?
I think the gun thing is kind of low-hanging fruit. I think it's such an easy thing to kind of that's easy. The controls, I think the reason they make sense right now, at least, is because they're precise. Certainly the touch and the Vive. You can walk around the room and you get exact positioning for where your hand is. There's also a benefit to it because you have direct input. If you want something to happen, just a button. It's not like my hand. Is it gesture? What am I doing with my hand? How am I getting to do something? You can't really touch buttons very well, especially with the Leap. I used the Leap on a project just recently, and it's very inaccurate. If you put your hand in a fist like this and turn it, it's using a camera. It can't register that. It doesn't know you're doing it. And as soon as you move your hand there, it's out of tracking. So the technology to do hand tracking has to become flawless, has to track, because there's also a bit of latency. You move your hand around, there's a slight little drag of that as it tries to work it out. It's not currently there yet.
Ben's going to argue with you because you need to play his game.
But it's really good.
I played Ben's demo that he made in 2 games at a game jam. I thought the hand control was amazing.
No, it's really good, and we used it on the project specifically because we didn't want to give people controllers, and we wanted to give them simple things to do in the world. It's really good at what it does, but it's not quite good enough for every purpose. And sure, you have to give someone motion controls, but you're expecting them to stick a headset on with a cable. You're kind of expecting them to jump through some hoops anyway. So I guess it's what's fit for purpose.
And I think that's where you look at technology like HoloLens. So Microsoft have bet big on augmented reality, and they've used their bit of tech, which they've been using in games called Kinect for ages, to forward-facing cameras which track. So HoloLens works because it can detect accurately where your hands are. And I think 5-10 years time, that is where it will be. It needs to be there. It doesn't just, it'd be nice to, it needs to go that direction, because if I'm a gamer, if I play a VR experience, I know how to use controllers. I stick, and I have done, stuck my Vive kit on my 82-year-old grandmother, and I give her 2 bits of plastic, and she's like, what the hell am I doing with this? And it's the same with young children as well. You give it to a child, and they're either going to throw it or they might break it, and it's £100 to replace.
One of my personal pet hates with the Vive controllers, that my personal opinion, is that we keep seeing the Vive controllers in the games, and we don't need to do that, because it makes no sense, because I've got a headset on, I don't know what they look like, I only know because I pick them up when I put them on. So I like projects where the Vive controllers don't look like Vive controllers in games. They might be guns, or they might be sticks, or they might be a bat and ball or a sword, and I think that's really interesting for the
some of that comes down to just priorities. And a lot of people, they're spending so much time making a cool world with things to do, and they're like, I've got the controllers, all right, they're here, it's fine. But I think, like you were saying, a custom visual to what you're holding, there's no reason not to, because the benefit of these sticks as well is you're holding something. Yeah. You're physically holding a thing, and you can represent a thing in your virtual hands in the game. So there's already, I guess, a bridge between
but it's still a limited amount of things that sort of fit.
Yeah, there's a limit, definitely a limit.
It's not a ball, for example.
No. But
I guess this is the conversation underlines my concern that that's one of the limiting factors around adding interactivity today. There are so many different opinions and ways of doing it. In 5 years' time, the problem will probably be solved, and there will be a best approach. But we need to have a business that runs and makes money and allows us to build content this year and next year. Otherwise, the point you made about attrition will become all too apparent.
So let's stop talking about technology. It's an animation festival. Let's spend the rest of the time talking about storytelling. So we'll bring David in on this, because you've recently made We Wait, which is a VR experience for BBC Taster, which is about refugees on the shore of a distant land trying to get across the Mediterranean, which is a fantastic experience. It's really beautiful. It really puts you in. And so this is my sort of question as well. Is it really puts you in the head of someone with using VR? It puts you in the view of someone on the refugee boats. You can look around. You feel like you're in the boat. It's done in a stylized Aardman way, which actually makes it more artistic and interesting. So my question there, we've been talking about this as well, is so. That's a first-person view, which we do a lot in games, and we also have a third-person view, which is more something like we see that third-person or fourth-person in animation if you're not controlling the character. So for empathy, immersion, do we want empathy, do we want sympathy? What should we be doing first-person, like in We Wait, or is third-person? Just questions around that.
I don't think there's any, there's no rules yet. So I think what is it you're trying to do in that instance? What we were trying to do was, what does it feel like to be a refugee simply waiting with your family and a group of others? So it's pretty sedentary. It's not dynamic at all. It is, you say, slightly stylized, so it's not photorealistic. It's representative. And you're just amongst this group. So the issue there was, and there's not a lot as in that first-person experience that you affect. It's not dynamic from that point of view. It's simply experiential. And you get a sense, it's not a terribly long piece. There are some cuts. You go from actually being on the coast to actually being in a boat. And we did affect what you would call soft cuts using a flashlight, which effectively burns out and then burns out the screen. You'll find yourself in a rubber zephyr thing. But there's the same rules. So that was really, and there's a fair bit of audio. I think if we did it again, we'd probably use more binaural stereo audio to give you a sense of location. you're mostly at night. So, and part of this was to do with rendering and money and all that kind of stuff. So mostly it's at night. So you don't see a huge amount other than the distant land that you're hoping to get to as lights. That was what we were trying to do. Can you unlike you could do it. Let's take a camera, stick it on the coast, record a bundle of real stuff. What happens if you stylize that? Do you feel the empathy? It was a scripted piece, but taken from testimony. So everything you hear kind of came from real refugees, although it was acted by Syrian actors. So it was a total construct. And as ever, it was an experiment, to be honest, with us and the BBC. I think in terms of what it was trying to do, quite successful. Had we done a totally photorealistic, stuck a camera on the coast and just let it run, would it have had as good an effect? There's a danger that it might have been too realistic and actually quite unsettling, I think, for people. There's that. Do you want to have a sort of one remove? I mean, this VR group, what's interesting, every couple of days they put out a whole bundle of links, news links. And one of the things that's come out of it, which is sort of inevitable really, is that when VR really works, and I was telling somebody earlier that it's being used on, the roller coaster industry is beginning to use it, because obviously effectively you can reskin a mechanical roller coaster very quickly by giving people VR headsets. And we went to see something at a really lovely Europa Park. It's a big theme park not far from Frankfurt, where they do state-of-the-art roller coasters. And they getting into VR, and to cut a long story short, they've coupled it to a very gentle, benign 40-year-old alpine ride. They've done it extremely well. It's quite a short piece. It's only it's 90 seconds long, the ride, but it's absolutely spot on. The timing is right. There's no latency, so you don't feel sick, even though you are travelling and you can move your head around a CGI constructed scene. What was quite startling, this is VR. It's going to be CG. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be weird. What I didn't anticipate was, because all my senses were having input that matched everything, that matched up. So the physical ride, obviously you're experiencing G-forces, you're experiencing wind, you're experiencing balance, and those movements are exactly matched and slightly more exaggerated on what you're seeing through the headset. So very, very quickly, your brain says, all my senses are in sync here, this can only be real. And both times we rode the ride twice in the space of a couple of hours. Both times when I got back to the station where you get out, it took me a couple of seconds for my head to say, oh, I'm back in this real world. And that was actually quite a shock, that how quickly our perception said, I can't compute this any other way than to say this is real. And yesterday, a link was sent from the VR group about a piece where they've done research saying, actually, there's a danger here. If it becomes too real, it actually becomes I don't know what the word, but it gets locked in your brain as literally a real experience in much the same way as a real life memory would. So if this virtual experience becomes real in your memory, what does that do with the way we're actually perceiving things and taking in these stories? And that is quite a profound piece of research, because it's saying, careful guys, we might be, for example, for the news guys, if it becomes too real, it can become very disturbing as a real life experience that people have had, simply because the way our brain computes all the input and says, actually, this is for me, it's in 3D, everything's syncing up, I'm actually having this experience, even though in fact you're not. So this stuff's really, really new, and clearly for young kids that's a worry, and there are quite big worries about, even with these headsets at this place in Frankfurt. I think if you're under probably 10 or 12, you're not allowed to wear them, which is fine. So I thought that was really interesting, actually. So is that, even when it was I was riding on a purple dragon, for Christ's sake, on this ride. I know it's not real. My brain didn't believe what I was telling myself. That was the weird thing.
We're showing off. We're doing a demo this afternoon of our dinosaur. We're showing off, and I've played that lots, almost every day, and I play it, and I still have the same feeling because it's so. You start off stood still, and you're picking something up and feeding it to a dinosaur. You're not going through space where it should be moving around. You're actually stood still, and you are stood still in real life. So that. The closer the movement is, like you're saying with a roller coaster, to what's on the VR, the more it feels real. And I play our demo and I take my headset off, and you do. We were showing loads of people, and you do feel like, wow, it's like sort of I'm back in the real world sort of thing. So let's go back to a bit more storytelling stuff as well, Nick. So my question for you: so WeWait's first person, Colossus third person.
Yeah.
A bit. It's sort of 3.5. I know.
Kinda.
Like Henry, you're experiencing basically Colossus. You're experiencing someone running around in the story and other things happening around you. Well, why that perspective rather than first person perspective?
I guess it just comes back to the role you are within the story. Because if you're invisible and you have no presence in the scene, no one's recognising you, you can't knock things over and stuff, and you can kind of take a step back and kind of just passively watch stuff. There's nothing asked of you, and I think that's quite a good way, at least, to start looking at things, because it's just a layer of storytelling you don't have to think about.
So do you think, in first-person perspective, it feels like I should be affecting the story more, whereas third-person perspective, it feels more passive and watching?
I mean, in terms of where you're actually positioned, whether you're on like eye level with these people, or I don't think that necessarily matters. I think it comes down to whether you're expected to be a character, an actual presence within the scene itself.
Because there's that thing you were talking about with Henry, and it is like you're a creepy stalker in the corner of the room. Because if you were just watching it, you would be the camera, you would be a VR camera. But he sort of winks at you
he does.
acknowledges that you're there.
Yeah, and then forgets about you again. It's very strange. But no, that's kind of where it's smart. If you were a presence in that room and the story continued, like you were his invisible friend, that could work really well. That could be a good way of doing that.
But that would change the story because he doesn't have any friends.
Yeah, so you would have to. He would maybe interact with you more, and then realise you can't interact with him back, and maybe get lonely because he hasn't got any real friends.
Yeah,
and maybe that would work. But I guess it's about how you contextualise it to the viewer, and whether or not you give them something to do or recognise them. And if you do, making sure that you don't creep them out.
So talking of creepy stuff, Ben, you worked on horror games.
Yeah.
So can we use these new things like this? This is a new thing. This has not really been seen in games. This is a new thing. Can we use things like that creepy third person in a horror game or something like that? Obviously, you can do it in a first person game.
Of course,
throw things at people.
I think if we took things like to a third person in horror in VR. It kind of detaches you away from the experience. I think horror is scary because it's you're there in the scene with it. I mean, if you look at cinematography and all that, you're always there in the scene. If you do it as a third person, I think you may well lose a lot of the kind of impact of horror. Because horror is about I'm scared of this, and I think if you're watching it, you're like, okay, if you see a spider on a floor, you're not going to be like, well, you may be, but you'd be like, oh, it's on the floor. If it's coming at you, right at you like that,
because this is a new question. Is horror necessarily about scaring you?
Yeah.
Could you be the scary thing in the horror story? That's quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an experience in PlayStation VR where it's called Kitchen, and you're tied up on a chair, your hands are bound. And there's this other character, he wakes up in front of you and staggers towards you and starts, oh no, we got to get out of here. And he starts to, and as you're watching, there's this like creepy woman in the background starts zipping around really creepily. And eventually she comes up and stabs him in the back and cuts his head off. But you're kind of tied up there, and your hand, you can see them represented like this. You've got the controller in your hands, and because you're looking like that, it kind of seems pretty realistic. And you're kind of like, you see this, and then you hear something behind you, and you're like, no. Like, if this was a film, I'd be like, oh, okay. But because it's like behind you, you're like, because you don't necessarily feel directly like she's going to stab you, but you start to feel really creeped out, and it's horrible.
Yeah, I think so. Going back to kind of like, should we do it as first person or third person with VR? I think for me, from a children's perspective, you've got that kind of, when it's first person, when I put like my sort of nephews in sort of VR, when it's been things which are big characters coming at you, particularly younger children can be quite scared of that. It's almost like when you're at Disneyland. I remember I was at Disneyland at 5 and this mascot came towards and I was like, oh no, hell no, run away. So third person is a lot less intrusive, it's a lot softer experience. So I think things like actually the Apollo experience is great because it softly brings you into being first person. It doesn't just go, wham, you're first person. It introduces you to the medium, it introduces you to the platform, and then you move forwards into it. So I think, particularly for storytelling for younger children, I think it's really important that you get them used to the environment and then bring them maybe into the action with first person. But I think it is good to mix them. I don't think it should just be first or just be third. I think.
Did you want to come in there,
Yeah,
Jonathan?
I think there's another really interesting opportunity which sort of sits between the two, and that's making VR social, both for adults and kids. VR is often seen as an isolating experience, but Facebook sort of launched their avatars or talked about their avatars at their conference earlier, a couple of months ago. But I think the opportunity to have your friends in the same VR experience, whether it's interactive or whether it's being in an immersive video, and be able to see what they can see, talk to them and interact with them, offers some really interesting opportunities in a storytelling way.
So from a storytelling point of view, you're concentrating on real time.
Yeah, so we're concentrating on video. Yes, effectively a teleport experience rather than a VR experience. It's be somewhere else.
Putting us in the room like with a camera. So does everyone want to wait for the VR camera? Just
you're
to make something exciting. Hello, VR camera, and we'll share this afterwards. So from a storytelling perspective, we'll probably have to start wrapping up in a minute. But just one thing I wanted to talk about, because we've mentioned immersive theatre. We've pretty much all mentioned that. I think that's really interesting from your perspective of filming live things. Have you done any immersive theatre yet? Can we edit that together and create stories from immersive theatre?
We are actually going to be doing some of that in the next couple of months. We're talking to a theatre company about doing that. I think one of the interesting things that we're still experimenting with, just a point that Nick made earlier, is do you want to provide a directed experience? So if you have multiple viewpoints, multiple cameras, maybe in a theatre, sort of on the stage and in the audience, do you want to provide that directed experience for people, or do you want to give them the opportunity to say, well, I want to see things from this viewpoint, I want to choose this viewpoint? And we certainly see VR changing things to make the viewer a participant in being a director as well, and giving them more control over viewpoints. And then how you actually make that a structured experience gets to be more challenging, because people might be just looking over there when the interesting thing's happening, on that camera over there.
Someone asked me yesterday if we could do VR from a football stadium and they could choose any seat in the stadium. And I said, that's a lot of cameras. We might have to do that. Let's finish up because we need to be finishing, but can we take a couple of questions we got?
Thanks. I'm completely ignorant about this whole technology, so I'm hearing this for the first time. And hearing you talk about the various things, I have two worries. Isn't virtual reality going to become a substitute for reality, especially for impressionable young people? Secondly, if this technology got into the wrong hands, sick minds might start making, say, Suicide Bomber, or I'm the Yorkshire Ripper, or drug-fueled sex orgy, or something like that. Is there not? I know I'm sounding old-fashioned devil's advocate, but this is me hearing all this for the first time. I'm worrying.
We've been having sex-fueled drug orgies in 2D for 100 years. So is it the same questions, the same arguments? I've spoken about the original Nickelodeons, and David's mentioned that before. What do you think, as someone that makes lots of children's entertainment as well?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the things that this grouping is looking at. Kind of where do you draw the line? How do you? Because there will be, relatively, it's easy to do this stuff now. The tools are relatively easy.
It was actually your comments, Dave, about being on the roller coaster and how graphically real it was. That it took you a while just to come down from that.
Yeah,
so
a few seconds, but that's right. So I think that's one of the things that. Where the industry is going to look at how, like anything, they said the same thing about film in 1896, in a sense. So, yes, how do you make it good rather than bad?
That's when I was born, by the way.
And also, just to quickly add to that as well, let's look at it on the positive side, because obviously there's lots of positive sides with technology and entertainment. And I went to a showcase for the ADIS Trust in Stockport about a month ago, and I was talking to people in wheelchairs, and I was showing them some VR stuff, and I was saying to them, you know, you're in a wheelchair, then they were pretty severely disabled, they could maybe move one hand or move their heads, and they were saying, I was saying, you know, imagine that you can be horseback riding through the desert, or, you know, on a camel by the pyramids, or you can be standing on top of Mount Everest, stuff that, you know, realistically, they were saying realistically they probably would never get to do. So there's a massive positive element to it as well. You can take people, and we've got Google Classroom at the moment, where the teacher can sit here with an iPad and say, right, we're going to the pyramid point, and all the kids have got, they suddenly stood on top of a pyramid and learning about it from that. So there's a very big positive element to it as well.
Safety-wise as well, I think, you know, the evidence of the past is that films are more likely to, you know, they were much more restricted in what they could show, censored as well, and it's only over time things become less censored. And I think the temptation or the inclination for authorities will be to clamp down on anything that's remotely scary or problematic. Oculus themselves have said, you know, children shouldn't be using this headset unless you're like over 12 or 13. And I think it'd be great. I mean, if it gets to that stage where it can genuinely be so realistic that it's a danger to people if they use it incorrectly, I think that'd be amazing.
Let's finish that question. Any more questions? One more question?
I just wondered if the panel could comment on the potential of VR for education and learning, particularly given the examples that I've seen are often really drawing on the idea of empathy and putting children or young people in situations that obviously we would hope that would require or encourage empathy.
So talking about VR for education and how we can use it to improve people's lives. I just touched on there with Google. Anyone wants to talk about that?
We're working with a Norwegian university and looking at how we can use 360 video streaming to enable distance learning. So we effectively take the Open University into a sort of full 360 experience where you have a camera like this with people actually physically in a lecture, but then you have people with headsets on the other side of the world in the same lecture, able to communicate, able to talk. So that's a very simple use of the technology to remove the barriers of physically not being present.
We've brought a project with us that you're welcome to have a go on later on, or come and find me at lunchtime because I have it in my bag, which is teaching people about MS, multiple sclerosis, and it actually puts you, it starts off putting you inside the brain of someone with MS, and you can see all the neurons and how everything degrades when you've got MS. So that's really powerful, really. And talking about empathy, empathy is my thing with VR, putting you inside the shoes of someone else. We can put someone inside the mind in the head of a cowboy or a space alien or whatever, but we can also put them in someone that's got MS. And in our project as well, it not only shows you how it works, but it gives you an example of how it works as well. So it puts you on a beach and says, imagine this, you're on a lovely beach and you've got MS. It can blur your vision, and it blurs your vision. It can put spots in front of your eyes, it puts spots in front of your eyes. So it's really experiencing the world from another person's perspective. And the same when I mentioned the disabled people as well. They've got a different perspective that they can, see through virtual reality. Sorry.
To pick up on the Apollo 11 project, the guys who make that immersive VR education, they're also doing a lecture platform, so you can go into a space with a virtual lecture or a group of people and be in spaces and learn about them in very contextually smart spaces. They're doing a Titanic experience where you think I'm allowed to say that. They're doing some other great stuff, and there's lots of really good educational experiences, like directly educational. But I think, like you're saying, the empathy thing as well. I've seen a few where people are actually, for disabled people, learning what it's like to be disabled. For people who are disabled to be able to do more, learn more in ways they're not able to. I think it's a really good possibility.
From a live video point of view, I was speaking to Alzheimer's Research last week, and they've got an app where it has video and it can show you what it's like from the perspective. There's a famous one that a lot of people are talking about at the moment that puts you in the mind of someone with autism, and it's flashing lights and showing things that can affect people with severe autism. So that's very good. I think Andy stood up, so that's the signal to finish the talk. But we're all around for a bit. If you want to come and talk to us at lunchtime, we're going to have some VR demos. I think we're doing a VR demo on stage later, and then afterwards we've got VR demos and one-to-one sessions. If you want to come and talk to us, come and have a play later.
Thank you.
Thanks.